back to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show that asks very cool, interesting, and famous people about the various firsts on their paths to success. Today is no exception. A really exceptional man, exceptional college president, and intriguing person. I would add that to the list of adjectives. Zachary Faison Jr., the 30th president of Edward Waters University, used to be college, but in his tenure became a university in Jacksonville, Florida, is our guest. And what an interesting man in terms of his origin story, in terms of his upbringing in Atlanta, Georgia, his educational path, and just the value that his family placed on education and education achievement. We get into a lot of things today. We get into cultural things. We get into a little bit of politics as it relates to getting past the divisiveness and focusing on pragmatic things. And in his particular case, who is going to help and how are they going to help historically Black colleges and Edward Waters University in particular, as opposed to this is a bad person or this is a good person. And he navigates that in a very interesting way. He also navigates social media in an interesting way. I recommend you check out his social media presence. He speaks in a way that is not, as he mentioned, some people may say not presidential, and you'll hear his response to that. I think it's interesting, but fascinating guy who certainly plays an important role in academia, in HBCU circles, and beyond that, really, because he taps into a lot of important figures, brings them to the university, and really has put Edward Waters on the map. If you don't know, Edward Waters was founded in 1866. It's, I think, the oldest private university in Florida. It's the oldest historically Black college or university in the South. It was founded, as I said, in 1866. If that seems like a significant year to you, it would be, right around the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so there was an institution in little old Jacksonville, Florida, being founded to educate then recently emancipated slaves. And you can imagine what a history they have, and the number of prominent African-American Black figures who have come through Edward Waters and, of course, other historically Black colleges and universities, because not only is it the right choice for a lot of people right now, and we get into that as to why one might choose to go to an HBCU, but without even getting to that, from the 1800s on to at least the 1960s, 1970s, it was effectively the only choice for a lot of Black people. So you've got a real high number of important historic figures and everyday figures in the Black community and in the community at large who have come through HBCUs. So I hope those of you who know the HBCU story appreciate this recordation of its achievements and one particular president's achievements and personality and the current role he's serving. And for those of you that don't know about the HBCU story or don't know much about it, I hope that this episode of the My First Rodeo podcast gives you some insight and some appreciation, and maybe even moves you to support Edward Waters and some of the other great historically Black colleges and universities around our country. So this is me talking to Zachary Faison, the president of Edward Waters University. All right, Dr. Faison, welcome to the My First Rodeo podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is absolutely amazing.
Well, you deserve it. It's been a long time coming. When I started this podcast, you were one of the people I thought he is intriguing and interesting. And even though I've known you for 6 years,
yeah,
and then I'm a fan of yours as well. There's a lot of things you spend time with people, but you don't get to know them.
Well, the fanhood is mutual.
Well, that's very kind of you. But I'm assuming that if I don't know you, in certain things about you and your background,
right,
and your metaphoric first rodeos along the way, then probably a lot of the other people that are fascinated by you and admire you and appreciative of all the great work you've done, especially at Edward Waters, would enjoy hearing it as well.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So let's start at the beginning. is the beginning is Atlanta, Georgia?
Yes, I am a native of Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised very proudly. Grew up in Atlanta, and had a great experience there, and still love it.
Yeah, I know you're a big Bulldog fan.
Yeah, big University of Georgia Bulldog fan. I'm just a big sports fan overall, though.
I love that. And I want to get into just, I love how, particularly when it comes to sports, but really a lot of things, a lot of cultural things and other things, you really wear your life on your shirt sleeve. And I love that.
Yeah. My mom tells this funny story about how, like, when I was a kid, I would be outside playing or what have you, and I'd be like the most passionate, like loudest person out there. And she said it used to really bother her, but over the years, she just kind of learned, like, hey, that's just his personality. So, I'm a passionate person, particularly things that I really, believe in and support. So. Yeah,
I love that. I think you and I are alike in some ways, and then there's other ways I wish I was more like you. I definitely don't mind wearing my life on my shirt sleeve. And, I grew up a drummer, so
wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, I like to I say drummers make our mistakes loudly.
Yeah.
Which is fine, I think it's confining to spend your life worried about making mistakes.
Yeah.
And
but we have that in common then. I grew up in Atlanta, but I grew up in a musical family. So, my father played piano. My mother is a singer. And so at a really young age, I think I was like 5 years old, I got enrolled in the Atlanta Boy Choir. So I spent a lot of time in my childhood doing a lot of singing, operatic singing. So, it really shaped my life. It was a great experience.
How early did you start that?
Yeah, I was 5. And so I think I was in the Atlanta Boy Choir for 7 years. We started when I was 5, and got to, travel the world. We went to the UK, went to Russia when I was 12, to Leningrad, traveling all over the world with the Atlanta Boy Choir. So it was an awesome experience. And, I was really blessed with some great parents that just, kind of exposed me to everything. Like try it. I said, I want to do horseback riding. Okay, we'll let you try that. Playing the violin, the piano. I wish I'd stuck with the piano, but never really did. But music was a huge part of my life, particularly singing and traveling with the Atlanta Boy Choir.
Yeah. Do you, obviously we all do a little singing around the car in the shower, but do you still sing at all?
Let my wife tell it. I'm singing all the time. Not in a formal way, but, so after the Atlanta Boy Choir, my church, I grew up in church. That's a big part of my background as well. We had a youth choir that was pretty popular and was on national television. There used to be I think it's still around. TBN was like a Christian network, and so the church that I grew up in weekly had a broadcast on TBN, and I was one of the lead singers for our youth choir that was on television, and we traveled all around, and so we recorded about 4 different albums, and I got a chance to sing and be a part of that, and that kind of shaped a lot of my teenage years into young adulthood. And so after that, though, I haven't done much singing. Kind of got grew up, if you will, and don't really get as much time to do it as much as I'd like to. That's
interesting. Yeah, you and I do have that in common. I sang as a young person, was in some of the county choirs and the boy choirs, and then did some dinner theater and even some professional touring companies, less as a singer and more as a musical actor. But about the time my voice changed, it's a completely different instrument when your voice changes.
It really is. And it happens, for all young men, usually 12, 13 or what have you. But like I said, it's something that it's kind of an outlet for me. If you're having a rough day, I'll get in the car and just like turn my music up and sing to my heart's desire. Or if I'm in the house, just start, belting out something. So
good for you. I bet you Tycee, does she get the occasional serenade?
She does. But the thing about it is, I say to her now, like when I'm singing, she's just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I mean, just because I do it so much, and I'm like, hey, do you know, like other people will probably like really be swooned by this, and she's like, whatever. So
I don't know. She just don't want your head to get too big.
I think that's what it is too.
I think she likes it. So tell me about your parents. I know they're obviously, like all of us, influence. Some parents influence for good, some for bad.
Yeah.
But I know every chance you get, you thank your parents.
Yeah.
And just in hearing the things you got to sample as a young kid, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, the two most amazing people that I've ever had in my life, both my mom and my dad. So my father's from a little town called Clinton, North Carolina. It's right near about 30 minutes or so from Fayetteville, North Carolina. So he grew up in a small town, every summer that I can remember, gosh, until I was probably about 15, 16 years old. I have a younger sister, and we always went to North Carolina for the summer with our grandparents there. So
it's just the two of you,
yeah. So it's just my sister and I. I have a younger sister that's 5 years younger than me, who's an educator as well. We can get into that, but it's
you guys are overachievers.
Yeah. Listen, again, we had awesome parents. I mean, I always, they cease to amaze me because, I was talking to my mom or my dad, both of them a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, how did you all like have jobs and like you're shuttling me to this practice, my sister to this, that, we're in church. Like, where did y'all find the energy?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I look back in amazement just at both of them. And then my mom is a native of Atlanta. And so they met when my dad, after college, both of my parents are HBCU graduates, which, that's a really big thing in my family. I'm a third generation product of an HBCU. So my mom went to Spelman College and my father went to North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. Okay. And after graduating from college, he moved to Atlanta in the late 70s and they met. And then along came me.
Wow.
So, yeah. So my mom's an educator as well, too. So she was a teacher and then became an administrator and then eventually became a superintendent of schools in Georgia and then started her own private school. So
really?
Yeah.
For what levels?
It actually was, I think, K through, did she go maybe K through 7, K through 8 at one time, or maybe it was first grade through 8. So she did that for some time and now she's retired, but she's working as a consultant in the charter school movement in the state of Georgia.
Good for her. I know I had the opportunity to hear her speak at least once at when you were invested as the president, which was a little bit after you'd already been serving. And wow, what a dynamic woman and a dynamic speaker.
She's amazing. I'm probably, in some ways, it's interesting. I kind of have the best of both of them. She's a much more demonstrable person. I probably get my passion from her. My dad is actually a much more quiet, reserved person, but really, really an awesome thinker. He's very, very wise. So I think, I got the best of the both of them.
Yeah,
so it's pretty awesome.
And your sister, is she more stoic like your father?
She's a lot more like my father in terms of her external kind of communications. Me and my mom are really both expressive and passionate. She's more reserved and does not like the limelight at all.
Right.
But equally, if not more brilliant, and just an amazing sister. So she is a associate professor at the University of Georgia in their College of Education. So again, we both, and neither one of us, I don't think, set out with the intention, at least I know I didn't set out with the intention to become an educator. But I think, with in our household, with both our parents, with my mom being an educator, and of course my father being a college graduate, just education was always like the primary thing. Like, you have to, achieve and do well in terms of your studies. So it's always been a priority.
Yeah, and that's interesting because obviously we hear a lot about how we don't value educators or education the way we should. We don't pay educators. Yeah. We pay, whatever, rock stars or lawyers,
right?
Doctors. and that's different than other countries and other cultures.
Yeah.
And so your family not only valued education, but held it up, if not as the job you were going to take, at least one you didn't foreclose, because of course you both ended up there.
Yeah.
That's, you guys are two of the best and the brightest, and that's what you gravitated towards. I wonder what in your upbringing, obviously your mother being an educator, but perhaps other educators and their influence on you along the way said, this is someone I admire and something I want to do.
Yeah, I think, for us, and I think for my sister and I both, the influence, particularly of my mom, was really indispensable in that regard. My father too. My father is kind of like the blueprint of the provider. Like, my father was always working, but not in a way that he was absent in any way. But it was just kind of like he was working, and then mom was kind of like with us. She was working as well, but like rearing us like on a day to day, and really just stressing the importance of, your education and your studies. Like, and I'll give this quick story. So I was in the 8th grade, and it may not appear to be the case now. And I have this joke with a lot of the students at Edward Waters, but I also was a pretty good athlete when I was, younger. Right. And so, I'll never forget, I was in the 8th grade. And you go to PE or what have you, and I'm there, and I mean, I'm killing it, right, in basketball, and I'm playing against the other kids that are on the team.
Right. You're not yet on the team at this.
No, I'm not on the team, but that's what I'm getting to. So, the coach comes out and he's like, why aren't you like on the basketball team? Like, what's going on? Like, you're killing all of my starters. Why aren't you playing? And so, so he goes to my parents, and unfortunately, I had made a C in algebra. And so my parents were like, we don't accept C's in our household. So Zachary's not bouncing any balls anywhere until he pulls his grades up to get A's. So that's kind of the way in which, my parents, kind of looked at, extracurriculars and education. It was always the most important thing, in my life and in our household, and how things were kind of, prioritized and done. So, yeah.
I guess they encouraged you to admire the people that were teaching you things, and the administrators of the schools as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if you said, but your father, what did he do?
So my father's a computer programmer.
Okay.
So interestingly enough, he majored in political science, but when he came to Atlanta, he kind of surveyed the landscape, and again, this is late 70s, early 80s. So computers is kind of like the thing, and he ended up taking a test at Trust Company Bank at the time. And he took a test, and the test came back. He scored like extraordinarily well. And so they paid for him to go and, take computer programming courses. Again, that really wasn't his plan, but found that was something he was really good at. And again, this is kind of like I said, late 70s, early 80s, with the advent of, all the computer and technology, and, took this test and just did amazingly well at it. And then he's had a career as a computer programmer for, ever since 40 plus years now.
Wow. What an evolution of that profession in the years he's been in it too.
I think it's called, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, it's like AS 400, AS 4000, some kind of computer language he's like the expert on, that all these companies, utilize in terms of, their programming.
Wow, that's very interesting. And are they both still in the Atlanta area?
Yeah, so my mom actually lives between Albany and Atlanta. That's another story. And my father is still in the Atlanta area.
I got you. Yeah. And without getting into their business, one of the things I admire about them and appreciate of you is when I went through a divorce not too long ago, you were kind enough to reach out and remind me how important it is, and how possible it is to raise kids functionally.
It is.
Through a divorced family. And I know that happened at some point in your life.
Yeah, it did. When I was a freshman in college, my parents got divorced. And so, that was a challenging time, but I'll tell you, one of the things that I say to my parents now is, until you become an adult, you don't really, kind of appreciate, all that adulthood is, right? Yeah. And so it's not like you get a playbook or a manual, that tells you, how to do these things. So, although it was a challenging time for us, I think, both my parents subsequent to that have done a great job of kind of, merging our families. There have been fits and stops and challenges, but, as we sit here today, I'm thankful for my mom and my father, and now I have his wife, who's like a second mom to me, Miss Daphne. She's been married to my dad now 20 plus years, and so we have now a blended family, and so it's been a blessing.
Yeah, that's nice. It's nice to see that, when you keep the kids, and you guys were young adults at the time, or at least you were, front and center, that things can work out all right. Yeah, that's neat. Now, so I want to figure out the origins, to the extent, you self-reflect on it, of your leadership style, because I've now had the privilege of observing you for a number of years, and you're unique in so many ways. And I don't know that I can adequately put it into words. Of course, I'm not around you 24/7. But you expect a lot of yourself.
Yeah, I do.
And you expect a lot of the people around you. You are, opportunistic, it seems to me, and I mean that in a positive way, in uh, entities and individuals and politicians that you'll align with because you've got goals
Right.
for your university primarily,
Right.
whoever you're serving. And yeah, and you're very encouraging of the people around you, but also very demanding.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you experienced those examples throughout your life.
I
And
did.
Sort of cobbled it together into, the person that is Zachary Faison. But
Yeah.
But I know that's a lot to bite off. But tell me sort of your leadership style origin story.
Well, again, and not to keep harkening on the same kind of inspiration, but my parents are seminal in terms of developing my leadership style and my approach. I wasn't the kind of kid who was just given things. My parents raised me. You've got to earn everything that you get, and you're not going to be given for doing the minimum. And the minimum for me was, well, I'll give you this example. So when I was in high school, I've been, fairly academically gifted, all my life. And I could kind of get by without doing a lot of studying and make, A's and B's or what have you. And so, I would come home and I may have like 4 A's and 2 B's or 5 A's and a B. And I'd be like, well, all the other kids, like their parents give them like $100 for every A. And my dad is like, you didn't study. You didn't do anything. Like, I'm not going to reward you for what I know for you is mediocrity. And I think that in many ways that shaped my drive and how we want to lead, in my professional life with regard to really, really not short selling yourself, stretching and making sure that all of us are being the very best that we can be. Now that may be on a continuum, but how can we, again, maximize our best as a team, as a university, everyone around the institution? We need to maximize and stretch and not settle for, just getting by.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you balance that? Because you're not only leading the administration, you lead the entire school and directly and more indirectly the students. And as you say, different people are capable of different things. Obviously, you have the luxury of hiring people that are excellent,
right.
And helping them be even more excellent. But how do you balance, sort of in this day and age where everybody wants positive reinforcement and constructive criticism means compliments.
Yep.
I'm not saying that's the people around you, but that is the culture. And a lot of it's been spoken about in terms of all the participation trophies we give out.
Right.
So, that may not be the way that you were raised, but you're now working with students who were raised that way,
right.
and colleagues. How do you sort of accept that's maybe how a lot of them came up and say, no, that's not enough here?
Well, I think it's precisely what you just said. I accept that that's maybe how they came up, but I don't accept that that's how you should leave our institution, right? In many ways, and it was really part and parcel to why I chose Edward Waters University uniquely as a private, independent Christian institution, because its values were ones that align with mine in terms of we don't necessarily believe that you should come to us at 18 and leave the same way when you're 22. I think it's part of our role as educators and as educators that have a distinct mission, a set of core values. It's our job to help to transform and transmogrify you into your best. And we're going to push you towards that at every turn. We're not going to allow you to just say, well, this is how I was raised, so this is how I am.
Right.
And I think that's I think I'm pretty hard on myself in that regard to say, well, that's an excuse. You ought to be able to grow and mature and develop and be a lifelong learner. And I think that, and I hope that, that's kind of the ethos that we've set for our students, our faculty and staff, and everyone at the institution.
Yeah, no, I see that a lot. And like I say, it's unique. Another unique thing about you, and again, some of it's generational.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you became a college president. Were you 38?
37, 38, yeah.
Yeah, so right in there, and as your social media handle reflects, a millennial president.
Yeah, I'm a geriatric millennial. So I was born. That's what I call it, a geriatric millennial. I was born in the early '80s, and so in a lot of ways, I embrace some ways that may not be as traditional. And, I think a lot of folks think that I'm trying to do something, but I'm being me. Right. Yeah. And I had someone say, well, that's not very presidential. And I kind of retorted. I said, well, did I do it? And they said, yeah. I said, well, then it's presidential.
Right.
Right. So, you know what I mean? And so that's been interesting. I engage with our students on social media. I'm on social media. I want our students and everyone to see that, like, I am a human. Like, you can reach out and touch me. Like, I love football, so I may be screaming for my team. I like music. And so I think it's a different way than maybe what we've kind of seen as the traditional stodgy, ivory tower, buttoned up. And I can do that when it's necessary, but, sure. I think it's, to your point, it may be an offshoot of my generation and really just me being authentically who I am.
Yeah. And it gives, it's certainly relatable to your, I'm sure you're old to your students. Right. It's just inevitable, but you're not an old stodgy person to them either, which would be the alternative. I know you use, I'll sound like an old stodgy guy here, the vernacular of
absolutely.
Of our youth. So you mentioned a little bit about somebody saying not presidential, but what's some of the good and bad feedback you get on that, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, and I'll say this, as I mentioned earlier, I try to fashion myself to be, a lifelong learner. I've grown. I think I've, developed, even in this seat going into 7 years now. So I think there's some great parts about it. I've experienced some parts that weren't as positive. If you've got students complaining, or you have just stakeholders and constituencies that, because you are so accessible, then the lines kind of get blurred, if you will, boundaries or what have you. I'm like, well, I'm like on vacation right now, and you're filling up my Facebook inbox with all these different, but in some ways, I think I've learned to be able. So I'll say this. So I have what I call my Facebook police and my Instagram police, which are my mom, my sister, and my wife, because they're both like, okay, take that down. Don't say that. You can't say that, Zachary. So, but I think over the years I've been able to, I won't say perfect it, but I think I've been able to start to navigate, okay, how do you engage in this space, but at the same time, be able to operate with nuance, right? And with, full appropriateness, because the truth is I am the president of Edward Waters University 24/7, 365. And that is, I have to recognize that, and that's how I'm, seen. And I certainly don't want to do anything ever to disparage or, impact negatively, our institution. So that's been a process. I'll say that.
I admire it, appreciate it, and find it interesting and good conversation pieces as people notice it. Yeah. And know that I have some association with Edward Waters, and so they'll ask about it. But I could use some police on my social media. So I don't have anyone present. If your mom and your wife are available, I might have to engage them. But I think you put a lot of provocative things out there, and I hope this wasn't one that was that the police took down. But I remember. And I don't remember the particular. I mean, obviously, we're in a divisive political time, right? You and I don't talk politics. I maybe have a sense of what your politics might be, but your pragmatic approach to building alliances for Edward Waters is what I've noticed. And I forget what it was. I'm pretty sure it was probably a Republican candidate at the state or federal level who had done some things for HBCUs. Yep. And, you really, at least as I perceived it, called out anybody who was critical of it in a way that said, we'll take help from anybody. That's right. We will hold to our standards. We're not going to take, I'm sure there's limits to that. Exactly. But the point was to encourage folks from all walks of political life to be more supportive of HBCUs in particular. Right. Rather than getting upset that you and other HBCUs were, doing photo ops with people from the other aisle. That's right. In many ways,
And the presidency now at colleges and universities is rife with it's almost inextricable now between politics and the colleges and universities. They are almost there's an again interconnectedness now that you can't really get rid of. So to your point, my approach in philosophy has been, in many ways, we have to be apolitical. A lot of times I have to maybe put my own personal political convictions at the door or away from the door and say, what's best for Edward Waters University? And the truth is that in order for me to get the resources and for order for us to get the resources that we need for our students, our faculty and staff, I need the support of Republicans and Democrats. And I think the work that we're doing in terms of educating young people supersedes whether you're blue or red, right? I think that it should be something that we can all coalesce around to say, hey, that students need support, that education is a good thing. Now, of course, it's a lot more, complicated than that in 2025. But I think, we've tried to approach things from the perspective that if we start at that as a baseline, and that's something that typically we can all agree upon, and kind of go from there. At times, do I take some courageous positions? Sometimes I do. And I think that, again, it has to be something that's in keeping with the morals and values and mores that are aligned with our institution. So, for example, I remember during the pandemic, I'll use this as an example, I'll be very transparent. I got a lot of flack. We had Governor DeSantis came down to our campus. They were like, oh gosh, I can't believe that you're standing next to Governor DeSantis. You had some folks on one side of the political aisle that would say that. And I said, but we're the first state-run site for the vaccine that we're bringing to Newtown, which is a majority African-American community. And we're providing something that, at that time, the vaccine was like gold, right? I said, so let's really focus on, what's important here. And so, I think sometimes it takes courageous leadership to just stand up and have some conviction and do what you believe is right.
Yeah, and I think the way I hear your message is we're looking for political leaders, all kinds of leaders, but political leaders in particular, to lead everybody, to treat everybody with compassion and support, and to make policies that are not political.
That's right.
And so we need to, when they're doing something that's positive or beneficial or collaborative, we need to recognize that and celebrate it.
Absolutely.
That's not celebrating the person. That's not celebrating the bad things that we do.
It doesn't mean that we're going to agree with everything that they do. I will be very honest. There are very few politicians, if any, on either side of the aisle that I agree with 100% of all their positions. But there are pieces of things that they do that I support. And there are some things that they do that I don't support. And to the extent that they want to be supportive of Edward Waters University and our mission and support of historically Black colleges and universities, we say, come one, come all.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's a related point, but one of the things that I've noticed about you, particularly early when you became the president, and I'm sure it's still true to some degree, is, and this happens in every community. It happens to Edward Waters. It happens, unfortunately, to, I think minorities in spaces where maybe they haven't historically had a presence and had their rightful seat at the table. So many different dynamics. And the dynamic is that you got to pay your dues. You gotta, this person or this entity, I don't know, deserves some special treatment, and I'm sure when you became the president, you were drinking from a fire hose trying to figure out who's who anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I noticed less of a, really trying to be efficient in where you could go to get the resources and the support and the engagement without regard to, what dues paying you were supposed to be doing. I don't know if I'm articulating.
No, I know. I think I know exactly what you're saying, and that was a challenge. And so, particularly coming on the heels of, let's just be real honest, a legendary figure here in the history of Jacksonville, just done a phenomenal work at Edward Waters, and former President Glover, and just having to kind of pay your dues. You're kind of the new kid in town. You're young, you're different in a lot of ways. And so I think, my first few years, my focus was let's focus on the work. And again, that comes from my rearing and my parents to say that, hey, listen, at the end of the day, you got to let your work speak for you. You don't get so caught up in a lot of the other, because at the end of the day, do the work, do it well, and produce results. Mm-hmm. Results matter. If you produce the results, the other folks will come around. Typically, you're going to have those that, are going to cheer you on. You may have some detractors, but at the end of the day, again, the work speaks for itself. And so I think our first few years, we really just focused on what our vision was and really trying to realize that vision. And we've been very blessed. I've been blessed to be joined with some great team members over the years, a wonderful board of trustees, 3 different chairs that have been very supportive of where we wanted to take the university. And we've had some historically unprecedented accomplishments. And again, I think that now in year 7, as I look back, we have a lot more people that are bought in. They say, well, I might not have done it that way. Right. And I was a little skeptical, but now, gosh, I see kind of what some of the method to the madness was. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah, no, and there's like objective ways that people see change. Again, just because I'm a conduit to some extent to certain segments of the community for Edward Waters, I hear it, and it could be things that you might call little, like just the written publications that leave the institution, the tickets for events. It just it really you've placed emphasis on that, where I know resources are scarce. Right. But what is it about presentation that you think is worth investing in? So
kind of getting back to kind of origin story. So originally, my plan coming out of high school and going into college, even my first 2 or 3 years in college, I wanted to be a journalist. So I was trained, in high school. I went to a magnet high school that was focused in communications and public relations and media. So I don't know if you remember the old the African American gentleman. He was like one of the first anchors on Sports Center named Stuart Scott. He was a university. Sure. Yeah. So I wanted to be like the next Stuart Scott. So
cool glasses.
He's awesome. And so, I think I got a chance to learn media and PR. And then I think by association, in terms of my generation, like we want to see glitz, we want to see glamour, we want to see excitement. And I also know, having been, an 18-year-old, as a millennial, the things that, excited me, the things that, I may want to, I say to my provost all the time, I say, listen, we have a wonderful business program. We have an amazing communications program. But the average 18-year-old, hey, they want to know, like, how's the football team? How's the band? Like, and so I think part of that was my recognition that from a branding and imaging perspective, we needed people like shiny things, right? Mm-hmm. And so to the extent that we can upgrade those things and build excitement, build our brand, we're in the airport, for example, for the first time now. You're seeing billboards around the city, our website, just really changing what the perception of the external community was about Edward Waters. Not to disparage anything that came before, sure, but to just say, hey, how can we brand our institution and really lift our institution in a way that bespeaks modernity and excitement. And so I think that's part of what we've endeavored to do.
I think so. And quality as well. I tell you, one of the things, law firms not all that different in the sense that, attention to detail is important. Courts want to see things. It's hard. The older I get, the more tired my eyes get. It gets harder to put systems and processes around you to, minimize typos. That's right. And things of that sort. But you call that out in everyone, it seems, in a way. If you do that wrong, it could feel oppressive. It could feel like I could never get it. Yeah. How do you balance that?
And I think, to be very forthright with you, I think that in some ways, some persons have maybe felt that way at different times over the years, but it was, again, not sacrificing the standard to say, to your point, hey, if we send an invitation out and it's rife with misspellings, right, that creates an image, a perception of who we are as an institution.
Yeah,
and so I think
better not to do the event at all.
Exactly. So I think, in some ways, I am very demanding. We are very demanding. We do have a level of excellence and a standard that we expect for everything around our institution to be done. And we hope to bring folks along with that, but we're also very, very, transparent about, I'm a big sports fan, as you know. And so Nick Saban has this saying. He said when he first got to the University of Alabama, he had to figure something out. He said, I needed to find out who needed to be on the bus, who needed to be off the bus, and then perhaps who might needed to have been in a different seat on the bus, right?
Right.
And so in many respects, we've gone through that process in some ways. And there's some collateral damage sometimes, but it's never been personal. It's been about how can we provide the very best that we can to the students that we serve? How can we advance this institution, grow it, and really, really be able to make the level of impact that we want to make as an institution? So
yeah. Well, the story, and I want to ask you maybe last of all about HBCUs and the HBCU mission, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say there are people that whatever don't see the value proposition,
right,
or have seen things that they think is not a standard. So they point to those things, and so you're not just working to create excellence, but to change and not give people an opportunity to say, oh, there they go again,
right,
or something like that.
Yeah, and I think even what's most important about that is that you're providing persons with context and information, because I think a lot of times people make judgments or they cast aspersions based upon the information they have. So I'll give you this example. As a matter of fact, I was just looking at this last week. So why I did this, I don't know, but you might know that I'm actually in a second doctoral program at Vanderbilt right now. Mm-hmm. So I was actually in class this past weekend, and we were looking at some Pell eligible stats. And so for your listeners that don't know, Pell eligible are students that typically come from low income backgrounds, right? So that low income is generally around $40,000 or less in terms of what their collective household income is. And so invariably, if you look at Edward Waters University, our number of Pell eligible students is around 80 to 85%. If you look at your alma mater, JU, if you look at UNF, you look at FSCJ, their Pell eligible students are generally around about 30%, right? And so we know that there is a distinct correlation between graduation rates, retention rates, with level of income. Right. And so I've had to have these conversations around Jacksonville, and people say, well, what about your graduation rate? And JU's graduation rate is here. And I say, okay, well, let's make sure we're comparing apples to oranges. Right. I said, so if I'm educating a population of students who 80% of them are coming from middle class, upper middle class, even a higher class family backgrounds, they're not first generation. That student, the research shows, is going to be able to graduate at a much higher level. They don't have the impediments. They don't have the financial impediments where they have to stop out. They've got a mom and a dad that are able to kind of help them to navigate that process. So it's not excuse making, sure, because we still, are pushing towards making sure that every student that comes to Edward Waters is successful and graduates. But it is providing that context so that when folks look at us, for example, they're able to see that this past year at Edward Waters, U.S. News and World Report came out, and we're number 24 in the nation in social mobility. Wow. A lot of folks don't know that around this city, that Edward Waters is one of the top producers in the country in terms of the volume of low-income first-gen students that we actually move to graduate, get into gainful employment, get great jobs, and are able to really turn the futures of their entire families around. Yeah. Edward Waters in this community is doing that better than almost anyone else in the nation, right? Yeah. So it's that context.
No, it's amazing, and obviously it needs to be told more, because as you say, it's not excuse making. It's what do you have to do? What is the gap? What is it that the folks that are not Pell eligible, that more likely to go to these other schools, don't have as impediments that your students do, and how do you remove or offset for those impediments?
Right.
Not make excuses, not
That's
say,
it.
well, we don't want them to graduate. No, we want to put in place things that will help them financially,
Absolutely,
and socially and culturally.
And so it beckons our call, in the community and throughout the state and throughout the country to say, hey, help us to do this, because it often the resources that are needed to get those students across the finish line are very different, and they also cost more.
Right.
But then often we know HBCUs, for example, let's talk about Edward Waters. We've been here, the first private independent institution of higher learning in the entire state, and our endowment sits right now at about $5 or $6 million, right? And so, to have the kind of capital that you need to really be able to provide the level of support to a young man or a young woman who is doing phenomenal in school. They may be an A student, and then, something happens at home, so they've got to leave because they got to go work now to support, a sibling or a parent and that kind of thing. And then Edward Waters doesn't have the resources per se from an endowment perspective to step in and say, you know what? No, I can help you. I can give you some emergency funds. We can help you with your family, but we want you to stay in school to graduate. So, I think it's my job and our job to provide that context, educate, and to find partners that are willing to invest and help us in this laudable mission we have.
Yeah, so let's finish with the mission. Obviously, there was something that was important about HBCUs to each of your parents and to yourself. That's where you went as well. You've worked at several HBCUs at the highest level, and now are the 30th president of Edward Waters University, and hopefully will be there for a long time. For listeners that don't know or don't appreciate it, what is the value proposition for HBCUs in 2025? And going forward?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the value proposition in 2025. What most folks don't know, again, context information, I think, is always invaluable and key, is that without HBCUs, you'd have to create them. If they weren't here, we'd have to create them. Why do I say that? About 75% of all African-American judges are HBCU graduates. About 70% of all Black teachers are HBCU graduates. I think it's about 65% of all Black engineers are HBCU graduates. 75 to 80% of all Black PhDs are HBCU graduates. So when you talk about the African-American middle class and professional class, you're talking about HBCU graduates. And a lot of folks don't know that. I think it's come more to light here recently with our vice president, who's an HBCU, our most recently passed vice president, who's an HBCU graduate. And so, that's the value proposition in 2025. The HBCUs punch way above their weight. We only make up about 2 to 3% of all colleges and universities, yet we graduate almost 30% of all African Americans that receive a bachelor's degree in this country. And so again, the value proposition and the worthiness of HBCUs is goes without saying. It's uncontroverted.
And part of that, maybe you were getting there, because the people that are not familiar with their role might say, well,
why do we need them at this point?
Shouldn't there be opportunities? Aren't there opportunities? But there's a
history
aspect.
And there's a history, and that's what I was getting to. So for example, in my lifetime, and a lot of times we say, oh, that was so long ago. No, in my parents' lifetime, they couldn't go to predominantly white institutions. This was not 100 years ago. This is mid 60s, late 60s. I don't think you didn't really start to see African Americans and people of color be able to attend your flagship University of Florida's, University of Georgia's until early 70s, right? For the most part. And
even then, not in high numbers.
Exactly. And so HBCUs were created. Let's take Edward Waters, for example. In 1866 is when Edward Waters was founded. From the 1860s to the 1960s, thereabout, for almost a century, African Americans were locked out of higher education. And so these institutions were created often by entities like the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Baptist denominations, and sometimes by the state to educate, provide access to African American persons that wanted to get a college education and develop trades and develop professional careers. And so we were never founded as an exclusionary institution. HBCU's doors have always been open to all races, all genders. And a lot of folks don't know. They're like, well, HBCU, it's black, so that means that only black students can go there. No, that was not the spirit in which our institutions were ever even founded.
Sure.
But they were created at a time when black folks were locked out from having any access to education. So that's the history and progeny from which we were birthed.
And of course, when I walk around Edward Waters, there's plenty of non-black students there now,
Yep.
and it's very attractive for them. But what is it that when the students and many of your students have plenty of choices, you've increased the standards considerably, and so it's not it's not an easy institution to get into necessarily, right. And many of your students have choices. The ones that choose to go to Edward Waters, and more importantly, the ones that thrive there, what is it that a HBCU offers them that another institution may not?
Yeah, I'll try to provide an illustrative example. So in 2019, my wife and I were in Albany, Georgia, which is where my mom lives now. It's kind of a second home for us as well. And I was sitting on the couch, and a local television station, news station, came on, and they were doing a news story on a student in Albany, Georgia, who was the salutatorian of her senior class there at Doherty High School in Doherty County in rural Southwest Georgia. And this young woman, never met her in my life, watching this television, program about her. She had garnered over $1 million in scholarship offers. And I said to my wife, I said, we got to reach out to that young lady. She needs to be at Edward Waters. Didn't know her from Adam. Okay. So about a week or two goes by, and I call my mom, who's lives in Albany, made some calls around the city, and we were able to get a meeting with her counselor there at Doherty County High School. And so I sent my wife. I wasn't able to go, but I sent my wife. I said, hey, I want you to go and see if you can meet with this young lady. So, of course, based upon the news broadcast, I knew her name, did some research, found her mom on Facebook. So again, very non-traditional, kind of found her mom on Facebook. I said, hey, I know you don't know me from Adam. Saw a news clip on the local news about your daughter. I know she has infinite options and could go anywhere in the world she wanted to go. But I want to throw my hat in the ring and say we would love to have her at Edward Waters then college. We're small. We don't have, nearly the robust, buildings and all. But what I can promise you is that if she comes to Edward Waters, she's going to have professors that are directly vested in her success. She's going to be able to have a president, a department chair, staff that are going to surround her and make whatever her wildest dreams are a real reality. That young woman took a chance. Could have gone anywhere. She had scholarships to Ivy League institutions, came to Edward Waters in 2019, and came as a presidential scholar. We just started our presidential scholars program. She was a member of our Alpha cohorts. It was our first group of presidential scholars. Graduated 4 years later, and now is a third year PhD student in molecular cell biology at Brown University. Her name is Brianna Pendergrass.
Wow. She
was our first Miss Edward Waters University. Mm. So I share that example because first generation, her mom had her when she was a teenager. She needed to be in an environment where there were going to be folks that were going to take a vested interest and a culture and a community that was going to surround her, push her to be her very best, and again, push her to make sure that her dreams came true. And so now she's a Black woman STEM budding PhD scientist at one of the world's most renowned universities. And so that's the story of HBCUs. That's right. The story of so many thousands upon thousands of young people that have come through our doors. And so it's the secret sauce that we have. And it's just a part of what we do at historically Black colleges and universities.
Yeah, and that is one story, but it's not a unique story, and that type of experience is available to every student at Edward Waters and at every HBCU that's doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of who we are. And again, we've been doing it for a long time. There are numerous other, again, thousands of folks that have that same story about coming to a place, not knowing what they were coming to or even where they wanted to be or what they wanted to do. And but for their HBCU experience, where would they be? But they've gone on now to just do amazing things in their lives. So
I love that. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't also talk about the First Lady. We've mentioned her a few times. And gosh, I admire your marriage. I admire how you guys are a power couple, how you support each other, how you encourage each other, how you, just speak so positively and how you look at each other. Where's that come from? And how do we bottle it? And how do I achieve that?
Well, she's the love of my life. I remember my late aunt passed one time and she passed. And I remember one time she said to me, she's your dream girl, isn't she? I said, absolutely. So she's the love of my life. She's the wind beneath my wings. All those cliches, but it really is genuine. It's really real. She has been a trooper. When you work in higher ed administration, I've lived in like 6 different states in different places, and she's always been there. And she's not we're probably, as you kind of mentioned earlier, we're pretty atypical in the sense that a lot of times you'll see a first lady or a first gentleman and they're kind of like off to the side, kind of seen, not heard, kind of genteel, not really. No, she's, if you've ever been around my wife or seen her on the campus, she's engaged. She's at every event. She's helping out during registration. She's at the games. She's, representing me at different places when I can't be there. And she's just absolutely amazing. And the students love her. Our community loves her. And gosh, I say all the time, I would never have become president and I wouldn't still be president now if it were not for the tremendous support of the First Lady and all that she does to keep me sane and going. And then all that she does for our students in our community. She is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I see that and I admire it. And you're lucky to have each other.
Yeah, I'm lucky to have her. Definitely.
Well, our community's lucky to have you, Edward Waters is, and lucky to have you as a friend. Thanks for joining me on the My First Rodeo podcast.
Absolutely. We got to do this again soon. This was awesome.
Oh, you're amazing. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. There we have it. That was me talking to Zachary Faison, Dr. Faison, the president of Edward Waters University. What an insightful interview, I believe. And I'm just so impressed with the way he approaches things in a new and innovative way, the way he learns along the way, the way he evolves, but doesn't compromise in the way that compromises who he is, his authenticity. He doesn't apologize for who he is, but he certainly grows and he learns, and his achievements are many. And when I say his, I mean the achievements of Edward Waters University for the last 7 years, and what he's built on top of the achievements of the great leaders like Nat Glover, who came before him at Edward Waters. So just really excited to get to sit down with someone who I've known for a while in a bunch of different capacities, but haven't obviously had the opportunity to sit down for an hour and ask him some of the questions that we got to ask him today. So it was insightful to me. I hope insightful to you as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you'll maybe be provoked to listen to some other episodes. We do have an episode with Nat Glover, who we mentioned a couple of times. First Black sheriff in Florida since Reconstruction, who went on to become the president of Edward Waters, his own alma mater. President Tim Cost, president of Jacksonville University, was interviewed on the My First Rodeo podcast. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of My First Rodeo podcast. I hope that you will subscribe. I hope you'll listen. I hope you'll share. And I hope you'll come back and join us next time on the My First Rodeo podcast.